What if the very moment you stopped chasing the avoidant was the exact moment they started chasing you in their own mind? Not out loud, not on the surface, but in that quiet, hidden place inside them where all their unspoken feelings live. What if everything you've been trying to say with your words, your effort, your late night messages, your endless patience, finally got heard the second you went quiet? Think about that for a moment. Really let it land. Because if you've ever loved someone with an avoidant attachment style, you already know the pain. You felt the confusion of giving your whole heart to someone who seemed to want it one day and run from it the next. You've replayed conversations in your head, wondering what you did wrong. You've questioned your worth, your beauty, your value, your voice. You've asked yourself the same brutal question over and over again. Why isn't my love enough? Why do I have to fight this hard just to be chosen? And here is the truth nobody tells you. The problem was never your love. The problem was never that you gave too much. The problem was that every time you moved toward them, their nervous system read it as danger. Every text felt like pressure. Every I miss you felt like a wall closing in. Every ounce of your effort became the very thing that pushed them further away. And then one day, something inside you cracked. You got tired. You went silent. You stopped chasing. And that silence is doing something to them right now that you cannot even imagine. Because here is what almost nobody understands about the avoidant mind. Avoidants are not emotionally empty. They are emotionally overwhelmed. They are not people who don't feel. They are people who feel so deeply that they had to build a fortress around their heart just to survive childhood. And when you were chasing them, that fortress had a purpose. It had a job. It was protecting them from what felt like an intrusion of feelings they didn't know how to handle. But the second you stopped, the fortress had nothing to defend against. And that is when the real war inside them begins. Stay with me here because what I'm about to share is going to change the way you see every avoidant you've ever loved. There are specific things, 3 of them in particular, that the avoidant secretly, desperately, quietly longs to hear from you after you stop chasing. Things they will never admit out loud. Things they don't even fully understand about themselves. Things buried so deep beneath their independence that they've spent an entire lifetime pretending they don't need them. And when you understand what those 3 things are, something powerful happens. You stop feeling crazy. You stop feeling rejected. You stop feeling like you were the one who wasn't enough. Because you finally see what was actually happening on the other side of that emotional wall. But before we get to those 3 things, you have to understand something first. You have to understand the psychology of what silence does to an avoidant. Because silence to someone with a secure attachment style is just peace. Silence to someone with an anxious attachment style is torture. But silence to an avoidant, silence is a mirror. And it is the one mirror they have spent their entire life running from. When you were chasing them, they had something to react to. They had your energy, your emotions, your questions, your reassurance seeking to focus on. They could deflect. They could withdraw. They could go cold and use your reaction as proof that closeness is too much. Your pursuit was actually protecting them from themselves. It kept them in the role of the one being wanted, the one being pursued, the one with the power. And in that role, they never had to look at their own fear. They never had to feel their own longing. They never had to ask themselves the question they've been avoiding their entire adult life. What if I actually need this person? Then you stopped, and suddenly, there is no more noise to hide behind. No more messages to ignore. No more poor me, their too clingy narrative to lean on. There is only silence. And in that silence, something starts to rise inside them that they have not felt in a very long time. Something that scares them more than any confrontation ever could. It's the sound of their own feelings finally catching up to them. And this is the moment. This is the exact psychological window where the avoidant begins to secretly want, need, and crave the very things they once pushed away. But here's the twist. And this is what makes this whole conversation so powerful. What they want to hear from you is not what you think. It's not, I miss you. It's not, please come back. It's not begging or pleading or promises. What they want to hear is something so much deeper, so much quieter, so much more human. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what those three things are, why they matter, and what it truly means for you. Have you ever wondered what it actually feels like to be the person who pushed love away and then watched that love finally stop trying? Not from your side of the story, from theirs. Because if you could step inside the avoidance mind in the first few days, the first few weeks after you stopped chasing, you would see something that would break your heart and set you free at the exact same time. Let me paint the picture for you, because most people imagine that when they finally go silent, the avoidant is out there living their best life, free, happy, relieved, sipping coffee somewhere, smiling that you're finally out of their hair. And I understand why you'd think that, because on the outside, that's exactly what they want you to believe. That's the mask. That's the performance. That's the story their pride is desperately trying to sell to the world, and more importantly, to themselves. But behind that mask, something very different is happening. In the first few days, there is a strange sense of relief. Yes, that part is real. The pressure is gone. The expectation is gone. Their nervous system, which was firing on high alert every time your name appeared on their phone, finally gets to exhale. They feel spacious. They feel free. And for a moment, they think, see, I was right. I didn't need them. I'm fine on my own. This is the phase where they double down on their independence. They throw themselves into work. They see friends. They post those pictures. They perform the version of themselves that says, look how unbothered I am. But here's what the research on avoidant attachment tells us, and this is where it gets fascinating. That relief, it doesn't last. It cannot last, because the relief was never real freedom. It was decompression. It was their nervous system finally releasing the pressure of being pursued. And once that pressure is gone, once the noise of your energy is no longer around to distract them, the silence starts to do something they weren't expecting. It starts to whisper. At first, it's small, a random thought during the day, a song on the radio, a place you used to go together. They brush it off. They tell themselves it's normal. They tell themselves they'd think about anyone they spent that much time with. But then the thoughts start coming more often. Little things. The way you laughed. The way you looked at them when they walked into the room. The specific way you said their name. And here is what nobody prepares them for. Avoidants have a delayed emotional response. This is one of the most important things you will ever understand about them. Their feelings do not come in real time. Their feelings come in waves, days, sometimes weeks after the moment that triggered them. So while you were feeling the pain of the breakup on day one, they were still numb. But now the wave is coming for them. And there is nowhere to hide, because here's the psychological truth. Avoidants use distance as safety. Distance is their default coping mechanism. When emotions get too big, they retreat. When intimacy gets too close, they pull away. It's not a choice. It's a survival response wired into them long before they ever met you. But that entire strategy only works when there is someone to pull away from. When you stop chasing, when you remove yourself from the equation, they can't use distance anymore, because there is no closeness to escape from. The distance is already there. You gave it to them. And suddenly, the very thing they thought they wanted feels like the very thing that is haunting them. This is when the second layer kicks in. And this one is brutal. It's called emotional exposure. When an avoidant is being pursued, they get to hide behind your emotions. They get to focus on managing you instead of managing themselves. Your anxiety becomes their armor. Your effort becomes their excuse. But once you go silent, the armor falls off. And they are left standing there with their own feelings. Feelings they have spent an entire lifetime avoiding, staring back at them. It is emotionally naked in a way they never signed up for. And here is the first hidden truth I promised you. Are you ready? Avoidants do not miss the chase. Avoidants miss the certainty of your presence. They miss knowing you were there. They miss the safety of your consistency. They miss the fact that no matter how cold they got, no matter how much they pulled away, you were still going to be somewhere in the background, loving them from a distance. That certainty was their anchor, and they didn't even know it was an anchor until you pulled it up and sailed away. Because deep down, in a place they will rarely, if ever, admit, the avoidant was not afraid of losing you. They were afraid of needing you. And now, in the silence you created, that fear has finally caught up to them. They are starting to feel something they promised themselves they would never feel again. They are starting to need. And that need is about to open a door inside them that has been locked since childhood. A door that leads directly to the three things they secretly, desperately want to hear from you. Why is it that the person who seemed to want space the most ends up craving one specific kind of message the deepest? What if the very thing you thought would scare them away is actually the exact thing their heart has been starving for since they were a child? Because the first thing the avoidant secretly wants to hear from you is not what you'd guess. It's not dramatic, it's not romantic in the way movies teach us. It's something so simple, so quiet, so deeply human that most people miss it entirely. The first thing the avoidant secretly wants to hear is this: you're safe with me. I'm not asking you for anything. Read that again. Let it sink in. Because inside those two sentences is the entire psychological blueprint of what an avoidant heart has been searching for their entire life. Not a declaration of love, not a promise of forever, not a plan for the future, just safety, just permission to exist without performing, just the radical revolutionary experience of being loved without being needed. Now, I know what you might be thinking, but I never asked them for anything unreasonable. I just wanted love. I just wanted consistency. I just wanted to be chosen. And you are right. Everything you asked for was healthy. Everything you asked for was human. Everything you asked for was what any secure person would want. But here is what you have to understand about the wiring of the avoidant nervous system. To them, any request for closeness, no matter how small, no matter how reasonable, does not register as love. It registers as pressure. It registers as danger. It registers as the moment right before someone leaves. Because somewhere in their early years, love came with a price tag. Maybe they had a parent who was emotionally unavailable, and the only way to get affection was to earn it. Maybe they had a parent who was emotionally overwhelming, and the only way to keep their sanity was to shrink themselves and disappear. Maybe they had a caregiver who was unpredictable, warm one moment and cold the next, and they learned that needing people is the fastest way to get hurt. So they built a rule inside themselves. If I don't need anyone, no one can disappoint me. If I don't want anything, no one can withhold it from me. If I stay small, stay quiet, stay independent, I stay safe. Then you came along. And even though your love was healthy, even though your love was beautiful, even though your love was everything they secretly craved, every ounce of it triggered the old wound. Because being loved means being seen. And being seen means being vulnerable. And being vulnerable means risking the very rejection they've spent their entire life running from. So when you finally stop chasing, when you finally step back, something in them starts to relax. The alarm bells stop ringing, the pressure lifts, and for the first time in a long time, they can actually feel you without needing to defend themselves from you. This is the moment when the message, "You're safe with me," becomes intoxicating. Because it removes the one thing that was scaring them all along: expectation. Do you understand how powerful that is? Do you understand what happens inside a person who has spent their whole life bracing for the demand that always comes with love? When they finally meet someone who does not demand, their nervous system exhales, their walls soften, their heart, that little wounded heart that has been in hiding since they were a child, peeks out from behind the door. Not because they are being pulled, but because they are finally not being pushed. And here is where the psychology gets even more beautiful. When you stop chasing, you accidentally, or maybe intentionally, communicate this exact message without ever saying a word. Your silence says it. Your dignity says it. Your peaceful absence says it. I'm not chasing you. I'm not begging you. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. But I am also not disappearing into resentment. I am simply choosing myself. And that message, that unspoken message, is the emotional equivalent of a warm blanket to a heart that has been cold for a very long time. But here is the trap you have to be aware of, and this is where so many people mess it up. The moment the avoidant starts to feel that safety, the moment they start to feel that softening, your job is not to rush in with your love. Your job is not to say, see, I knew you'd come around. Your job is not to punish them for finally feeling something. Because the second you do that, you re-trigger the old wound. You confirm the old story. You become the very pressure they were trying to escape. The safety they want to hear is not a strategy. It is a state of being. It is who you become when you finally stop needing them to complete you. And that is the deeper revelation hiding underneath this first message. The avoidant is not just craving safety from you. They are craving a version of safety they have never experienced in any relationship in their life. And when they finally sense that you have become that kind of person, not because you're performing it, but because you actually are it, something shifts inside them that no amount of chasing could have ever created. They start to wonder if maybe, just maybe, love doesn't have to feel like a threat. And that is the beginning of everything. But it is only the first thing they want to hear. Because the second thing goes even deeper. What if the thing an avoidant fears the most is not being abandoned, but being fully seen and still being loved anyway? What if underneath all their walls, all their distance, all their emotional armor, there is one specific fear so deep that it dictates every mixed signal they have ever sent you? Because the second thing the avoidant secretly wants to hear is the message that speaks directly to that fear. And when you understand what it is, you will finally understand why they have been running, not from you, but from themselves the entire time. The second thing the avoidant secretly wants to hear is this: there is nothing wrong with you. 6 words. 6 simple words. And yet, if you could somehow whisper them into the deepest chamber of an avoidant's heart, you would watch a lifetime of tension release in an instant. Because here is the secret they carry that they will almost never tell you. Avoidants do not think they are broken because they don't feel. Avoidants think they are broken because they feel too much and don't know what to do with it. And underneath every cold reply, every disappearing act, every emotional shutdown, there is a quiet, unrelenting voice inside them whispering the same thing. Something must be wrong with me. Why can't I love the way normal people love? Why does this feel so hard? Why do I keep hurting the people who are good to me? This is the shame layer of avoidant attachment. And it is a layer almost nobody talks about. When people describe avoidance, they usually paint them as arrogant, cold, selfish, emotionally lazy. And I understand why. From the outside, that is exactly what their behavior can look like. But underneath that behavior is not arrogance. Underneath that behavior is shame. Deep, silent, corrosive shame. The kind of shame that says, if they really knew me, they would leave. If they really saw what's underneath this, they would be disappointed. If they really understood how much I struggle with closeness, they would think I'm defective. So they perform. They perform independence. They perform strength. They perform, I don't need anyone. Not because it's true, but because it's the only version of themselves they believe is acceptable to love. Now here is where the dismissive avoidant and the fearful avoidant start to look different, even though the wound underneath is the same. The dismissive avoidant handles this shame by pretending it doesn't exist. They double down. They intellectualize. They convince themselves they are simply not the relationship type. They mock people who need too much. They pride themselves on their independence. But that pride is a defense. It is a beautifully constructed emotional decoy. that keeps them from ever having to look at the wound underneath. The fearful avoidant, on the other hand, feels the shame constantly. They swing back and forth. They want you, then they don't. They pull you in, then they push you away, because part of them is desperate for love, and another part of them is convinced that the moment you get too close, you'll see the real them and run. And this is why the message, "there is nothing wrong with you," is so powerful, because it disarms the shame. It contradicts the story they've been telling themselves their entire life. It says, "I see you, I see the walls, I see the mixed signals, I see the withdrawal, I see all of it, and I'm not diagnosing you, I'm not labeling you, I'm not making you the villain. I'm just telling you the truth. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not broken, you are protected, and there is a difference." Do you know what happens inside a person when they receive that message from someone who is not chasing them, not needing them, not trying to fix them? Something ancient inside them cracks open because for the first time, they are being met without being managed. They are being seen without being judged. They are being understood without being pressured to change. And this is what psychologists sometimes call safe truth. Safe truth is when someone tells you the deepest reality about yourself, but they do it from a place of love instead of a place of demand. It is the opposite of criticism. It is the opposite of ultimatum. It is the emotional equivalent of someone taking your hand in a dark room and saying, "I'm not afraid of what's in here with you. But here is the trick." And this is where so many people fumble the moment. You cannot say these words to earn them back. You cannot use "there is nothing wrong with you" as bait. The avoidant will sniff out an agenda from a mile away. Their whole nervous system is trained to detect hidden expectations, so the message only lands when it is true. And it only becomes true when you have done the deeper work of releasing your need for them to be different. When you have accepted them as they are, including the very real possibility that they may never change, that is when this message becomes something they can actually feel. Not because you're saying it, but because you're being it. And when that happens, something shifts inside them that you may never even witness. In the quiet of their own room, in the middle of an ordinary day, they will think about you, not with guilt, not with obligation, but with the strangest, most unfamiliar feeling of all. They will think about you and feel, maybe for the first time in their life, that they were actually accepted, not fixed, not managed, not chased, just accepted. And that feeling, that rare and holy feeling, is what plants the seed for the third and final thing they secretly want to hear. The one that goes deeper than any of the others. The one that touches the very wound their entire life was built to protect. What if there was one sentence, just one sentence, that could reach the exact place inside an avoidant that no one has ever reached before? What if underneath the independence, underneath the shame, underneath the walls and the withdrawal and the years of emotional armor, there was a single wound, so old, so buried, so painful, that hearing the right words about it would undo them completely? Because the third thing the avoidant secretly wants to hear is the hardest one. It is the message their entire defense system was built to protect. And it is the message that, if it ever truly lands, changes them forever. The third thing the avoidant secretly wants to hear is this: it wasn't your job to raise yourself. Sit with that. Because if you have ever loved an avoidant, if you have ever tried to reach past their coldness and touch the person hiding underneath, this is the sentence that names the wound. This is the sentence that speaks directly to the small, unseen child inside them who learned way too early that they were on their own. And this is the sentence that, when they finally hear it and truly feel it, cracks open the door to a grief they have been carrying their entire life. Because here is the origin story that almost every avoidant shares in some form. Somewhere in their early years, they learned a devastating lesson. Their emotional needs were too much, too inconvenient, too disruptive, or simply invisible to the adults around them. Maybe their parents were physically present but emotionally absent, showing up for the practical parts of childhood but disappearing during the tender ones. Maybe their caregivers were overwhelmed, distracted, depressed, or wounded themselves and had no capacity to hold a child's big feelings. Maybe there was chaos in the home and being small and quiet and self-sufficient was the safest strategy. Or maybe, and this is the one that hurts the most, they were praised for being mature, independent, so grown up for their age. And that praise became a prison because it told them that their worth was tied to not needing anyone. So somewhere around age 4, 5, 6, 7, they made a decision. They didn't make it out loud. They didn't even make it consciously, but their little nervous system made it, and it went something like this. If I want to survive here, I have to become my own parent. I have to soothe myself. I have to stop needing. I have to become so self-sufficient that no one can ever fail me again because I will never ask. And that little child, that brave, resourceful, terrified little child, did exactly that. They raised themselves. They became the caretaker of their own heart. They learned to swallow their fears, hide their tears, and perform okayness even when they were falling apart inside. Now imagine that child growing up. Imagine them becoming the adult you fell in love with. Imagine them walking through the world with that same operating system still running quietly in the background. Every time you got close, that 4-year-old inside them sounded the alarm. Don't need this person. Needing gets you hurt. You've survived this long on your own. Don't blow it now. Every time you offered love, that 7-year-old inside them whispered, "It's not safe to want this. What if they leave? What if they change their mind? What if they decide you're too much, just like everyone else did?" So the adult pulled away. The adult made excuses. The adult shut down, ghosted, disappeared, minimized the relationship. Not because they didn't love you, but because loving you meant undoing the very strategy that kept them alive as a child. This is why the message, "It wasn't your job to raise yourself," is so devastating and so healing at the same time. Because it names something they have never allowed themselves to name. It gives words to a grief they have never been permitted to grieve. It says, "You were a child. You should have been held. You should have been comforted. You should have been allowed to fall apart in someone's arms and know that someone bigger than you was going to put you back together." And the fact that you had to do all of that yourself was not a testament to your strength. It was a tragedy, and you deserve to feel sad about it. You deserve to be angry about it. You deserve to finally lay it down. Do you understand what this does inside them? Do you understand what happens when the wound underneath the wound finally gets seen? For most avoidants, they have spent their entire adult life being praised for the very thing that hurt them the most. You're so strong. You're so independent. You're so low maintenance. And every compliment reinforced the prison. But this message tells the truth their soul has been waiting to hear. It says the strength was survival. It says the independence was armor. It says the low maintenance was a child who learned to ask for nothing. Because asking for something once broke their heart. And here is why this is the hardest one for them to hear. Because if they let this message in, they have to feel the loss. They have to grieve the childhood they didn't get. They have to feel the anger they were never allowed to feel. They have to acknowledge that the walls they built, the walls they've been so proud of, the walls that made them who they are, were built out of pain, not power. That is a reckoning most avoidants will spend their entire life avoiding. But every once in a while, when the conditions are right, when someone has stopped chasing them long enough for them to actually feel their own life, this message finds a crack and it gets in and it changes them. But here is the twist that ties this whole thing together. You do not have to be the one to deliver this message with your words, because your silence, your peace, your refusal to keep parenting them the way they had to parent themselves delivers this message louder than any sentence ever could. What if everything you ever wanted to say to the avoidant is already being said in this very moment without you saying a single word? What if the silence you thought was empty is actually the loudest, most emotionally devastating message you have ever sent them? Because here is the paradox that almost nobody understands about no contact. When you go quiet with an avoidant, you are not withholding communication. You are finally communicating in the one language their nervous system has always been able to hear. Think about it this way. For their entire life, the avoidant has been surrounded by noise. The noise of expectation, the noise of demand, the noise of people trying to pull them closer, fix them, change them, decode them. Even the people who love them the most were often loving them loudly, in ways that overwhelmed their system. So they learned to tune love out. They learned to hear words like, I miss you and I need you, and come back, the same way you'd hear a car alarm going off in the distance. It's just noise. It's just pressure. It's just something to endure until it stops. But silence is different. Silence is a frequency they cannot tune out. Silence is a language that bypasses all their defenses and speaks directly to the part of them that has been listening their entire life for exactly this. Because here is what your silence is actually saying, whether you realize it or not. Your silence is saying, I am not going to keep proving my love to someone who won't receive it. Your silence is saying, I am not going to chase someone who runs from being caught. Your silence is saying, I love you enough to let you feel the consequences of your own patterns. Your silence is saying, I am no longer available to be the emotional shock absorber for a nervous system that never learned to regulate itself. And your silence is saying the most powerful thing of all. I am not disappearing because I don't love you. I am disappearing because I finally love myself too. And this is where the magic of no contact begins. Not the manipulative kind. Not the let me play games so they come running back kind. But the real kind. The kind rooted in dignity. Because when you stop reaching, you force something inside the avoidant that no amount of chasing could ever force. You force them to reach into themselves. And that is a place they have avoided their entire life. When you were there, filling the space with your effort, they never had to sit with their own feelings. They never had to ask themselves the hard questions. But once you go silent, there is nothing left to distract them from the one conversation they have been running from since childhood, the conversation with themselves. And this is when the attachment wound reactivates. This is when the very system that made them avoidant in the first place starts to fire in reverse. Because avoidant attachment is not the absence of an attachment system, it is a deactivated attachment system. It is an attachment system that learned early on to shut itself off in order to survive. But shut off is not the same as gone. That system is still there. It is still waiting. And when the conditions are right, when the pressure is off, when the pursuit stops, that system starts to wake up. Slowly at first, a thought here, a memory there, a strange ache in the chest they can't quite explain, and then more and more. Until one day, they are lying in bed at 3 a.m. and they realize with a kind of quiet horror that they miss you. Not the noise of you, not the drama of you, just you. This is what psychologists sometimes call the return of the repressed. Everything the avoidant pushed down while you were chasing them comes bubbling back up when you stop. The love they wouldn't let themselves feel. The tenderness they wouldn't let themselves express. The gratitude they never voiced. The apology they never made. It all starts to rise because there is no one there to project it onto anymore. And here is the part that will absolutely reshape how you see this whole thing. Their independence, the very thing they built their identity around, starts to feel different in your absence. It starts to feel less like freedom and more like loneliness. Less like power and more like isolation. Less like the proud castle they built to keep the world out, and more like an empty room they built to keep themselves in. But you have to understand something crucial here. This process cannot be rushed. This process cannot be manipulated. The moment you break your silence to check on them, to test them, to see if it's working, you interrupt the very process that was doing the work. Because your presence, even a small dose of it, lets them off the hook. It gives them somewhere to project their feelings again. It restarts the old dynamic. So the silence has to be real. It has to be complete. It has to come not from a place of strategy, but from a place of self-respect so deep that you would rather be alone with your dignity than partnered without it. And this is the version of you that becomes the mirror they cannot look away from. Because when you stop chasing, when you stop reacting, when you stop needing them to be different, you accidentally become the very thing they have been searching for their whole life. Not a rescuer, not a pursuer, not a fixer, but a witness, a calm, unshakable witness to their patterns, who love them enough to see them and love themselves enough to walk away. That is the version of you that gets under their skin in a way no amount of texts, calls, or grand gestures ever could. Because that version of you is the version they were always afraid to become themselves. But what if this entire journey was never really about them at all? What if every single thing you have learned about the avoidant, every insight, every revelation, every piece of the psychological puzzle was actually leading you to a much bigger truth about yourself? Because here is the ending nobody prepared you for. Understanding what the avoidant secretly wants to hear is not the map back to them. It is the map back to you. And that right there is the most important sentence in this entire conversation. Let me be honest with you. If you came into this hoping for a strategy, hoping for a script, hoping for a secret code that would finally unlock the person who hurt you, I understand. I truly do. There is nothing more human than wanting to be chosen by the person who made you feel unchosen. There is nothing more painful than being told your love is too much by someone who was never brave enough to fully receive it. And there is nothing more tempting than the fantasy of finally saying the perfect thing that makes them realize what they lost. But here is the truth I owe you. The moment you start using these insights to get them back, you have already lost yourself again. Because the goal was never to win them. The goal was to see clearly. And clarity, real clarity, changes everything. Here is what clarity looks like. Clarity is understanding that the avoidant's inability to love you the way you needed had nothing to do with your worth. Clarity is understanding that their withdrawal was not a verdict on you. It was a verdict on how much closeness their nervous system could tolerate. Clarity is understanding that you were not too much. You were exactly the right amount for someone who had the capacity to hold you. And clarity is understanding that a person who is emotionally unavailable will not become emotionally available because you learn to say the right thing. They will only become emotionally available when they decide for themselves that the pain of staying the same has finally become greater than the pain of changing. And that is not a decision you can make for them. That is not a sentence you can whisper into being. That is their work, not yours. So then what is your work? Your work is the person you have quietly been becoming this entire time. Because think about it. The person who stopped chasing is not the same person who started. The person who chose silence over begging, dignity over performance, self-respect over self-abandonment is not the same person who was once losing sleep, waiting for a text that never came. Somewhere in the middle of all this pain, without you even noticing, you started to shift. You started to become someone whose sense of self no longer lives or dies by another person's response. You started to become someone who can love deeply without losing themselves in the process. You started to become someone who understands that love is not something you chase. Love is something you allow. And the people who cannot allow it are simply not your people, no matter how much you wish they were. And here is the deepest psychological insight of this entire journey. The person who stops chasing is the person who starts healing, because chasing at its core is a nervous system pattern. Chasing is what happens when your attachment system tells you that if you just try a little harder, love a little louder, prove yourself a little more, then the person who is pulling away will finally stay. It feels like love, but underneath it is fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being left. Fear of the exact wound that got planted in your own early years, when love felt inconsistent or conditional or scarce. When you stop chasing, you are not just leaving a relationship. You are interrupting an entire pattern. You are telling your nervous system, we are not doing this anymore. We are not confusing anxiety for love. We are not calling breadcrumbs a meal. We are worth more than the leftovers of someone else's fear. And that is where the real transformation begins. Because once you stop chasing outside of yourself, you finally have the energy to build something inside yourself. You start noticing things you couldn't notice before. You start hearing your own voice again. You start remembering who you were before this relationship, maybe even further back, before any relationship. You remember the dreams. You remember the softness. You remember the parts of you that got quiet because they were never fully seen. And slowly, tenderly, you start to give yourself the very things you were begging them to give you. The reassurance, the consistency, the safety, the unconditional acceptance. You become the parent you needed. You become the partner you were waiting for. You become the home you thought you had to earn. And here is the beautiful poetic irony of all of it. When you finally become that person, whether the avoidant ever returns or not, stops mattering in the way it used to. If they come back, you will be able to see clearly whether they are actually capable of meeting you in the new place you have grown into, or whether they are just circling back to the old dynamic, hoping you'll play the old role. If they don't come back, you will grieve, yes, but the grief will not destroy you because you are no longer standing on a foundation made of their approval. You are standing on a foundation made of your own becoming, and that foundation cannot be shaken by anyone's absence. So let me leave you with this. The avoidant does not have some secret power over you. They never did. What they had was a mirror, and every wound they touched inside you was a wound that was already there, asking to be healed. This whole experience, as painful as it was not a curse. It was an invitation. An invitation to finally love yourself the way you always wished someone else would. An invitation to become so whole, so grounded, so at home in your own life that you will never again mistake someone's inability to love you for a reflection of your worth. And here is the question I want you to carry with you long after this ends, long after you close this video, long after the memory of them fades. If the person you were chasing was really just the person you were meant to become, who are you becoming now that you have finally stopped running after them and started walking toward yourself?